Please join with me in prayer. O Lord, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all of our hearts, be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, I'm sure most of you have heard the story about Jacob and Esau, how one was the hunter and the other was basically the farmer, who stayed a lot closer to home. Esau liked to get his hands dirty, hunting for game, and he had a build for it, big and hairy. Some people might even call him a little bit dim-witted. Jacob, though, was a mama's boy. He liked staying close to home and cooking up food and plots with his mama. Papa, though, he liked Esau. He was a man's man. And Jacob, I guess you could say, was a bit jealous of him. He wanted everything. He especially wanted his father's approval and blessing. So he ends up tricking his brother in order to get his brother's birthright, so that he would end up receiving the lion's share of the inheritance. And unfortunately for Esau, he let his stomach do the talking and his nose do the buying as he smelled the wonderful food that Jacob had made to entice and trick him. Now, it's almost as though once Esau ate the food and felt satiated, that stew became rancid, and he knew he'd been tricked. Conflict had been part of their relationship up until now, and, well, conflict just continued to feed the relationship. But God takes what happened between them, and he ends up blessing the whole world with the law, the prophets, and a Messiah who offers abundant life to everyone. When walls are put up, misunderstandings happen. Walls create hostility. Walls create division. Walls create attitude. The thought that I'm right, you are wrong. And so somehow we have to start to work at dismantling those walls. Misunderstanding can be turned into learning from each other. Hostility can be changed into appreciation. Division can then be turned into working together. So amazing things happen when the walls come down. And Jacob and Esau had to work a long time on tearing that wall down that was built between them from the time they were born, with Jacob hanging on to Esau's heel. When we remove the walls, we begin to share God's grace. We never know whose lives will be changed, whose lives will become better, whose lives will be filled with love. In the past little while, we've really come face to face with the impact that walls have created in our society. Think about the issues around Black Lives Matters, as well as what our own Indigenous communities have had to live with. With all the senseless deaths and beatings, we're realizing that our own wall of racism needs to come down. Even if we don't believe that there is a racist bone in our bodies, there are indeed walls of misunderstanding. And it does take a lot of work to dismantle these walls. And as we see, they're not coming down easily or quickly. But the good news is they are being dismantled. In the gospel lesson, Jesus tells that wonderful parable of the sower. The sower, or the farmer, throws the seeds all over the place, apparently not really caring what happens to them or where they end up. But I think he actually did care. I'm thinking that he wanted to give them the opportunity to grow in places that no one had even thought possible. Because that's the power of grace. That's the power of God's love. Now, if we would have been worshiping in real time and together in the sanctuary at Eden, I would have created the parable cascading down those stairs. But I can't do that. So I have a few things up behind me to remind us of the parable. But when I was ministering with King City, one of the women in the congregation, Betty, helped me to create this vision of the parable. And thanks to Bev Killen, you're going to get to see the parable. Well, sort of. There should be a picture at this point. And in that photo, on the left, or the side that's closest to where the pews are, you will see some dirt and a bunch of weeds. Probably from our garden, because we always have bumper crops of weeds. We know how to grow them really well. And then you'll see in the midst of the weeds are some seeds. And then next to that path is sort of a strip of, not ribbon, but a plastic, I guess, that's brown, to represent a pathway. And that means that it's the well-worn path, and there's some seeds strewn there as well. And then on the far right, you'll see a bunch of rocks with seeds scattered among it. And then there's that area with the beautiful plants and seed coming out of that cornucopia abundantly. So now imagine all of that at the front of Eden Church. Don't worry, I would have brought in a tarp and done all that and cleaned it up as well. And Betty and I cleaned it up at King City because we didn't want to get the custodian Lou a little upset with us. But as you look at that photo, maybe you're wondering if the weeds might strangle the growth. Or maybe you're wondering that the sun's going to burn the seeds on where the path seems worn down. Or maybe you're wondering that there just isn't enough soil where the rocks are. But maybe, just maybe, in spite of all that, growth is going to happen. We can't just sow God's love in the safe places, because sometimes we need to take God's love, well, into the dangerous places, the suspect places, the uncomfortable places, because those are the places that need God's love probably more so than those safe places. We sow seeds of faith all the time when we open our mouths and maybe our hearts as we share what's happening at the church. When we share maybe how God is active and present in our own lives. And I know sometimes that's really hard to do, isn't it? Oh, people misunderstand and they put up a wall. Oh, you're one of those churchy people. As if it's a version of COVID that they're about to get. Well, I'm thinking that those who are on the front lines, the hospital workers, the pharmacists, the grocery store clerks, the farmers, the paramedics, those making PPE materials, those working to create a vaccine, they're the ones who are sowing seeds like crazy. We are already loved and accepted by God, whether we acknowledge it or even accept it, because that love and acceptance is just there. And that is liberation. That's exciting. And because of that forgiveness, liberation, we're able to participate in God's passion for the transformation of ourselves, of our community, and of the world. So these seeds really are worth sowing extravagantly, which is exactly what God's done with each one of us. So we can bring the wall down by sowing our seeds of faith. Be liberal in the casting of the seeds. We never know what's going to happen. We just might be surprised by the yield from the crop we have sown. I've made it a habit that when I go grocery shopping, I buy some flowers for the cashier, and each time they are so surprised that someone is thinking of them and wants to thank them. God's love is for everyone. It's that extravagant. It's not stingy. It's extravagant. Sowing or casting the seed takes a lot of faith. And we all want to see the church growing and flowing. But not only here, in so many churches, ministers and parishioners lament the fact that people are not flocking into the pews like they did when they were children. Oh, you remember back then in Sunday school we had 392 people. Well, I want to ask the question, what's the seed that you're sowing? Seed of love? Seed of positiveness? Seed of negativity? The seed that gets sown too often lands on the worn down soil, and I know that. It gets worn down by racism, or it's plucked up and eaten by apathy, or it's choked by the pursuit of wealth and selfishness. But remember where Jesus focuses the parable. It's not on what's lost. It's on what is sown. The church was left in the hands of 12 apostles. And from those 12, well, look at what has happened. The seeds found fertile soil. And around the world, the church grows. But here in North America, we're consumed with worry. It seems we've grasped onto being reluctant. We are reluctant to cast those seeds of love and hope. We're even reluctant to let a neighbor know about the link for the YouTube worship that you have. So the seeds of worry overtake us, and that wall gets built. We need to remember that we are not the Lord of the harvest. We're the sowers. And it is kind of hard to be the sower, I will admit, because, well, we want to see the results, and we want to see them last week in the bank account. So rather than worry over members lost, this parable calls us to sow seeds of grace and mercy on new ground. Don't worry about where it's going to land. Be concerned only with the casting and the sowing of the seed, and to do it as liberally and abundantly as possible. See how the seeds are falling out of the basket in that photo? Do you remember? Well, that's what we're called to do. To cast the seed and leave the rest up to God. And that's what this parable demands. That you sow the seed. Don't complicate it. Don't try to figure it out or analyze it. Just do it. Sow those seeds of love. And then leave the rest up to God. Thanks be to God. And all God's children said, Amen.